from a wounded bobcat, alone after the death of its mate, from a trembling, abandoned puppy shivering in the cold mist. No one thought those two creatures could ever find each other. And yet, they looked at one another through the mesh of steel. No growls, no fear, just a single gaze and a long breath as if it had been waiting forever. Science could not explain it. Logic dared not believe it. But the heart knew instantly. Love had just appeared, in a place no one expected, between two species that had never known how to love each other, and that story would forever change how you see life itself. Among the whispering old pines and the cold winds, where the fog never fully lifts from the Sierra Valley, a wild bobcat was counting down his final days before returning to the forest. His name was Ash. Fierce, wary, entirely wild. Few believed that the creature, once collapsed in a hunting trap, bloodied, infected, and grieving the loss of his mate, could ever recover. But after 3 months of care at the Sierra Creek Center, Ash stood again. Quiet, hardened, preparing to return to the wild. Everything was perfect until Rusty appeared. A puppy no larger than the palm of a hand, trembling, fragile, gently placed on the wooden porch at dusk by a silent young boy. No mother, no trace of anyone who'd cared for him. Only ragged breathing and pleading eyes, like a life nearly forgotten. And in the moment Rusty was carried past Ash's enclosure, something changed. That bobcat, the one who had never let anyone near, suddenly rose, growling, stepping close to the mesh as if to protect. No one could understand. No one dared approach the puppy while Ash's eyes remained fixed. But that wasn't the strangest part. The release date had been set. The transport crate is prepared. But Ash, the bobcat born to live alone, refused to leave the puppy behind. He searched frantically when Rusty wasn't near, called out without stopping. Why? Why would a wild animal, nearly broken by loss, give up freedom just to stay beside a creature of another kind? The answer, according to a wildlife vet with over 30 years of experience, would bring tears even to the most stoic hearts. Ash is still completely wild, Jude had said just a week ago, and that is the best sign for a successful release. Throughout the recovery process, they had followed every protocol: minimal human contact, a richly stimulating natural environment, simulated hunting practice, and gradually expanded spaces for Ash to roam. Every step was designed to help him remember he belonged to the forest. Dr. Eva Moreno had written on the final evaluation chart, pre-release assessment scheduled for next week. Then she continued walking the gravel path past the enclosures. Sierra Creek Center was currently caring for 27 animals, from injured raptors to orphaned fawns, each carrying its own rhythm of healing. But none among them could have predicted that, within a single night, all those plans would be upended. The call came just after sunset. Nina Brooks, the overnight vet technician, picked up on the third ring. Sierra Creek Rescue Center, this is Nina. The voice on the other end was young, trembling, almost a whisper. I found a puppy. Really small. I think it's dying. Nina exhaled slowly and softly. Domesticated animals weren't within their official scope, but turning away a life crying out for help, that's not something you learn to do after years in this place. Where are you? Right outside the center gates. My dad brought me here. All right, bring it in. I'll wait for you in the intake room. 15 minutes later, under the warm, golden lights of the examination room, Nina knelt down to examine the smallest creature she had ever received. A golden retriever puppy, no bigger than a palm. Its pale golden fur was matted and sticky. Its eyes were still milk-clouded. Its chest rose and fell so faintly, each breath seemed about to vanish into the air. The girl who brought him in was Ellie, 14 years old, red-haired, with freckles across her cheeks. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "I found him under the floorboards behind the house. No mom, no sounds, just faint whimpers. All afternoon." "How long was he outside?" Nina asked as she pressed her stethoscope to the puppy's chest. "I only found him today, but I think he's been there a long time." Rusty's heart was weak, his breathing wheezy, his body temperature dangerously low. Respiratory infection, malnutrition, and severe hypothermia. Barely 3 weeks old. At this age, he should still be curled up in his mother's belly, nursing, being licked warm each night. "We'll do everything we can," Nina said, her gaze firm yet gentle. Ellie nodded, biting her lip, squeezing her father's hand beside her. After gathering contact information and letting Ellie whisper a final goodbye into the puppy's ear, Nina carried the fragile little creature to the treatment room. First came the warming pad, then IV fluids, then antibiotics, dosed precisely for a life not even half a kilogram in weight. "We'll need to feed every 2 hours, even overnight," she told Hannah Doyle, the youngest volunteer at the center, just starting her shift. "Can you take the first round? I'll go prep a private incubator." Hannah nodded, already mixing the special newborn formula. "Does he have a name?" she asked, gently stroking the matted fur on his head. Nina looked down at the creature curled tight like a droplet about to burst. The girl called him Rusty. "Seems to fit." "Rusty," Hannah repeated with a soft smile. "Hang in there, little guy." Neither of them knew that this tiny being would shake the very foundations of wildlife rehabilitation theory they had once trusted, and that, in less than a day, Rusty would touch a heart thought to be long sealed, the wild heart of a bobcat named Ash. "You're safe now," Hannah whispered, placing a gentle fingertip on the trembling pup's head. She didn't know. No one in that room knew that this fragile creature, barely a few hundred grams, would soon compel the entire Sierra Creek Center to rewrite what they once believed to be standard. By the next morning, Rusty had made it through the critical stage. Still, his breathing remained labored, his body temperature unstable, and his heartbeat, though more regular, was as delicate as a newborn leaf in the mist. Eva stepped into her morning shift, steam rising from the coffee in her hand, and couldn't hide her surprise at seeing a puppy in an incubator next to the vital sign monitor. "I know," Nina spoke first. "It's against protocol. But leaving him out there..." Eva nodded. No need for the rest of the sentence. "We'll contact the regional domestic animal rescues once he's stronger," she said. "For now, this place can give him more than anywhere else." Sierra Creek Center had strict rules. No mixing of species, no exposure between wild animals and domesticated ones, meant to prevent disease transmission, avoid imprinting, and protect the instinct for wilderness. Each patient was carefully arranged, predators in one zone, prey in another, shielded from sight, sound, even scent. Because stress, even the slightest, could unravel an entire recovery, which is why what happened that afternoon defied explanation. Hannah was carrying the incubator, holding Rusty past the east wing, the rehabilitation area where Ash's enclosure was. She intended only to take the puppy to the back courtyard, a quiet space for feeding. But just as she passed the mesh fence, Ash, the bobcat who always turned away at the sight of humans, suddenly sprang to his feet. He didn't growl, didn't hiss. He froze, as if he had just sensed something no one else could feel. His nose twitched, his ears stood high, and then he made a low, unfamiliar sound, something like the cooing hum of a mother cat soothing her young, but deeper, heavier, tinged with longing. Hannah stopped in her tracks, nearly dropping the incubator. "Doctor, Eva, Jude, someone, come here. Right now." Her voice shook, not with fear, but with the confusion of witnessing the inexplicable. Eva stepped out first, still holding her clipboard. Her expression was one of irritation at being pulled away from her reports, until she saw it. Ash, the one who had never left the corner of his enclosure, was now pressed against the fence, his eyes locked onto Rusty like a trance. His whole body crouched low, not tense like a hunter preparing to strike, but like a mother beast cautiously examining something fragile. "Move the pup back a little," Eva said softly. Hannah complied. Immediately, Ash leaned forward, scratching gently at the metal grid, then let out a small, hoarse, unsettled growl. "Now bring him closer again," Jude suggested, just arriving. "Let's see the next response." As Rusty was brought closer, Ash instantly calmed. He sat down, pressed his cheek to the fence, and once again, that deep, warm sound emerged, the one none of them had ever heard from him. 20 years working with bobcats," Jude muttered. "I've never seen one react to a puppy like this. Never." Eva frowned as if trying to push emotion aside to analyze. No signs of predatory response, no stalking posture, no aggressive gaze. This is a protective reflex. The three of them stood still, saying nothing more. Ash now lay against the edge of the enclosure, his amber-brown eyes following Rusty as if nothing else in the world mattered anymore. Eva exhaled slowly. "Whatever this is, we still have to follow protocol. Take Rusty back to treatment." Hannah nodded, lifting the incubator again. But this time, as she turned to walk away, a soft sound echoed behind her. Not a growl, not a call, but a sigh of sorrow. A sound adrift in the air, dissolving like mist, making each of the adults in the team feel something quietly collapse inside them. Ash, the wild bobcat, had just called out to a creature of another kind, using a language only those who've known loss can understand. "The last thing we need," Eva said tensely, "is a wild bobcat forming an attachment to a domestic dog." Hannah gave a small nod, cradling the incubator gently, walking down the dim yellow-lit hallway of the treatment wing. But just seconds after the door closed, the sound came again. A growl, low, long, choked. Not a warning, not a threat. It was pain. That cry echoed through the Sierra Creek Center, slipping past wooden walls, sliding into the chests of everyone like a blade made of sound. Eva, Jude, and Nina all froze. No words, just glances exchanged. And they knew Ash was calling, not from instinct. It was a plea. That night, Rusty worsened. Despite fluids, warmth, and antibiotics, the puppy's breathing remained heavy, his chest convulsing with each inhale as if battling life itself. The warmth from the heating pad beneath him could no longer sustain his body temperature. By midnight, Nina sank into a chair, her face pale. "I don't think he's going to make it through the night," she said, eyes fixed on nothing. Eva remained silent. She was no stranger to life and death, but this felt different. There was something about this tiny creature that her heart refused to let go of, even if it was just a flicker of hope. The two women, one older, one younger, took turns through the night, monitoring, holding warmth, watching the monitors, silent, until Hannah burst through the door, breathless, her face drained. "Ash hasn't stopped calling, an hour now, not eating, not sleeping, won't stop, just like earlier, but worse. I think he knows." Eva was about to shake her head, but Nina suddenly looked up, eyes glowing as if she had just touched something undeniable. "Wait, what if?" She stopped mid-sentence, as though aware she was about to say something that would be considered irrational. "Nina," Eva asked, her voice hoarse, "what if we try something different, something not in the textbooks?" "What do you mean?" "There's a concept in neonatal care. The presence of a mother figure, even of a different species, can increase survival rates, heart rate, oxygen levels, temperature, the will to live." Eva sighed. "Nina, you're not suggesting—" "Not putting them in the same enclosure," Nina cut in quickly. "I'm not crazy, but what if we place Rusty, still in the incubator, behind several layers of barrier, next to Ash's enclosure, even just for a few hours? If not to save Rusty, then at least so the other animals can get some sleep." Under normal circumstances, Eva would have dismissed it immediately, but this was no longer normal. And she understood. Being a doctor sometimes meant more than saving lives. It meant having the courage to admit some things exist beyond logic. "Only as a soothing measure," she said, "and it must be monitored all night." As soon as Rusty, still curled in his incubator, was placed 3 meters from Ash's enclosure, behind 2 layers of metal fencing and a shatterproof glass panel, Ash fell silent. The large bobcat walked to the barrier, pressed his cheek to the bars, and exhaled deeply as though he had just found something he'd lost. And then he made that sound again. A low, deep hum, the kind that exists only between mother and young. A sound shaped like a wound once stitched shut by the instinct to love. From inside the incubator, Rusty stirred. 3 a.m. The pup's breathing eased. His head lifted slightly, ears twitching. The monitor displayed a stable temperature. By the time dawn turned the pine canopies pink with mist, Rusty had drunk half a syringe of formula, more than any previous feeding. Eva stood motionless, staring at the chart. No one said anything, but in their eyes was something medicine would never record. It was a dying creature, choosing to live, because another being, even wild, remained by his side, humming softly, never leaving. Each time someone approached Rusty, Ash let out a low growl from his throat. Not fierce, but clearly a warning. "It's like he's appointed himself as guardian," Jude whispered, his hand tightly wrapped around a mug of hot tea. "But why?" That question had lingered in Eva's mind since the night before. This morning, she pulled out Ash's intake records for the first time since he'd been rescued. "I missed something," Eva said as the team sat in the break room between shifts. She pointed to a handwritten note from the hiker who found Ash. The hiker reported seeing a deceased adult female bobcat not far from where the trap was set, likely killed by a large predator within the previous 24 hours. The room fell silent. Jude spoke slowly. "You think that female was Ash's mate?" Eva nodded faintly. "Possibly, or at least part of his territory. Bobcats live solitary lives, but during mating season their ranges can overlap. But that still doesn't explain why he bonded with a puppy," Hannah murmured. Nina, quiet until now, set the file folder down and spoke. "There's research on trauma responses in mammals, where caregiving instincts transfer to another being after a loss. You're saying Ash lost his mate, was injured, then captured," Jude summarized. "And now he's projecting his protective instincts onto Rusty?" Nina nodded. "Even if they're not the same species, even if it goes against every survival instinct. But grief sometimes finds a way out, no matter what shape it takes." Eva folded her arms. The 55-year-old doctor, a woman of reason, shook her head. Not in rejection, but in quiet helplessness. "We can't let emotions interfere with protocol. Ash has 10 days left before release. If this attachment continues, the entire recovery will collapse." The team nodded, but no one said anything further. Because they all knew The cost of that decision wouldn't be written on paper. It would live in the eyes of a creature who had lost everything and perhaps was learning to love again. In the days that followed, Rusty began to grow. His lungs cleared, his skin turned pink. His eyes brightened with each sunrise. He started lifting his head when footsteps approached, licking the syringe each time he was fed. And Ash, while the rest of the world outside his enclosure remained unchanged, didn't waver for a moment. Each time Rusty was taken for a checkup, Ash would pace frantically, slamming against the bars as if the sky were falling. When Rusty returned, he would lie down, turn his head, and let out that familiar low hum. He wouldn't eat unless he could see Rusty, wouldn't sleep unless he heard that faint breathing through the glass. Every time Rusty shifted, Ash would extend a paw through the bars as if trying to reach him. More than once, Eva stood watching from a distance, her hand clenched tightly around the clipboard strap. She had seen fawns cry for their mothers through the night, cubs convulse from starvation, coyotes whimper for their lost pack. But never had she seen a bobcat, a creature who had once clawed at everything around him, fall into absolute stillness, all because a tiny life stirred inside an incubator on the other side of a barrier. News spread quickly. First came the volunteer group, then the state conservation specialists, and soon even the Eastern Mountain Wildlife University sent researchers to observe. On a misty morning, Dr. James Halden, a senior professor who had authored 3 books on bobcat behavior, stood behind the reinforced glass, his voice firm. "This is anthropomorphism. You're projecting human emotions onto animal behavior." Nina, holding the lab report clipboard, didn't turn around. "Then how do you explain Ash's cortisol levels plummeting in Rusty's presence? Why does he only eat his full ration when he hears the pups breathing from the other side of the incubator?" James stayed silent. Despite his 30 years of teaching, he had no answer for those eyes. Eyes, the amber-brown eyes of a bobcat gazing at the tiny creature as if it were the only thing holding him together. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a biological coincidence, but to those at Sierra Creek, those who had witnessed every tilted head, every low hum, every gentle paw against the bars, the truth was becoming harder and harder to deny. And the undeniable moment came, on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. Rusty, now over 4 weeks old, was getting more active. While Hannah was holding him to clean his eyes and nose, the puppy squirmed and slipped from her hands. The tiny body hit the wooden floor. A soft yelp escaped, barely audible, but in that instant, the entire center seemed to hold its breath. From the east enclosure, Ash slammed into the steel fence so hard that the entire cage shook. The sound that tore from his throat, it wasn't a call. It wasn't a hunting cry. It was something else. A signal. A frantic, piercing scream filled with panic, like the cry of a mother beast when her cub falls from the cliff. Ash only stopped when he saw Rusty being lifted, safe, unharmed. The entire staff stood frozen. No one among them doubted what they had just witnessed anymore. That night, Eva sat alone in her office. The only sound was the wind slipping through the cracks in the old wooden frame. Outside, the pine forest was pitch black, and in the distance, an owl called to its mate. On her desk were 2 folders. One was Ash's release file, with every physiological marker perfect. The other, Rusty's transfer to Glenfall Domestic Rescue, scheduled for when the pup reached 8 weeks old. On paper, both were proceeding exactly as they should. But Eva couldn't sleep. She had worked in this field for nearly 30 years. She'd seen bobcats tear through veterinary gloves, bear cubs break steel doors, mother wolves lie silent for 3 days beside their dead pups. But never Had she seen a bobcat turn himself into the shadow of a creature from another species, not from instinct, not from need, but simply to be close, to protect? A soft knock on the door. Jude entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee and eyes that no longer wanted to argue about anything. "You can't sleep either?" Ava took the mug, nodding slightly. The scent of warm coffee spread into the quiet. "I keep telling myself that I'm doing the right thing, that releasing Ash into the wild is what's best. But in 3 decades of doing this, I've never seen a bond like this," Jude said. "I can't explain it, but it's real." Eva exhaled, placing her hand on Ash's file. 2 days until the final evaluation. Physically, he's perfect, but emotionally? Jude nodded. "I called Rafael Martinez." Eva looked up. "He's running Wild Pines now, the sanctuary for non-releasable wildlife. It's overloaded, but he recommended someone else. Marcia Ellington, former conservation director in Montana. She has a licensed facility, 40 acres of forest near Donner Pass." "She takes cases like this?" Eva asked, though she already knew the answer. "Only the rare ones, the ones that can't survive if separated from the creature they've chosen as family." Eva said nothing. She looked out the window, where moonlight spilled faintly over the Sierra Range. Part of her still wrestled with the rule book. Do not grow attached, preserve properly, don't let the heart override the science. But then, a low voice from Jude. "Our job isn't just to return animals to the wild, it's to make sure every individual gets a life worth living." "So," Eva whispered, still staring outside, "what does a life worth living look like for Ash?" Release day arrived, under a sky of endless blue, and the scent of pine drifting on the morning breeze. The transport crate was carefully prepared and placed beside Ash's enclosure. Inside were clean straw, secure straps, and everything needed for the 90-mile journey to the sanctuary, where Ash would have an entire territory of his own. Jude, Nina, Hannah, and Eva stood in a circle, reviewing the plan step by step. No one mentioned Rusty. No one had to. That silence had taken shape. Because everyone knew today, it wasn't just about releasing a bobcat. It was about choosing between what was right and what was righter. "All right," Eva said softly, glancing at the clock. "Begin the transfer." The plan had already been written, just like the 100 times before. Administer a mild sedative. Wait for Ash to calm down. Move him into the transport crate, then begin the journey west, where he'd be released into the old pine forest with his own territory, abundant prey, and no more cages. Jude prepared the syringe. Nina checked the monitoring gear. Hannah waited by the enclosure door. Everything started perfectly. Ash received the sedative, resisting at first, then gradually slowing, his body collapsing like a wave retreating against the rocks. When they opened the enclosure, the team worked in sync, as they had hundreds of times before. Every movement was quiet, until a sound tore through the air from the direction of the main building. A high-pitched, trembling whimper, familiar enough to haunt. Rusty. Though still in the treatment room, doors closed, curtains drawn. Somehow the little pup had sensed that something was about to happen, and he cried out. The entire team froze. Ash, hazy under the sedative, immediately lifted his head. His ears twitched, eyes widened, and then, to everyone's astonishment, he tried to stand. "He's fighting the drug," Nina gasped. "We need to hurry." The team moved quickly, keeping their rhythm as they guided Ash into the transport crate. But the moment the door latched shut, the bobcat began to thrash. From behind the mesh, he let out a long, guttural wail. Not of anger, but of panic. He pushed against the crate with his legs and shoulders, crying into the morning mist as if the world was about to take from him the most important thing he had left. "He's panicking because of Rusty," Hannah whispered. Eva stood still. In theory, she knew what had to be done. Leave immediately while the sedative still had effect. But every fiber in her being was screaming, "No, not like this. Not now." "Wait," Eva said firmly. "Jude, call Marcia Ellington." Jude looked at her silently. He understood immediately. She was halting the release. "I'm considering every possibility," Eva replied. But they both knew what that meant. That afternoon, the entire team gathered in the meeting room where the wooden floors were worn and the curtains swayed in the mountain breeze. Marcia Ellington, a renowned figure in wildlife rehabilitation, had driven through the forest to get there. At 63, with sun-worn skin, a wiry frame, and eyes that seemed to read thoughts, she didn't need introductions. 40 years in the field. The last 15 were dedicated only to the forgotten ones, the animals that could never return to the wild. After reviewing the files on both Ash and Rusty, Marcia nodded slightly. "I want to observe them together. No direct contact, just close enough to see the true nature of their interaction." They complied. Rusty's incubator was brought and placed a few steps from Ash's enclosure, behind 2 layers of protective mesh. Ash, now fully alert, moved toward the edge, lowered himself slowly. No growls, no claws, just a gaze and a soft, steady hum. Rusty stretched, wagged his tail once, then rested his cheek on the incubator mat, breathing evenly. Marcia sat silently for nearly an hour, saying nothing, just watching. When she finally stood, the entire room waited, as if for a verdict. "This is a real attachment," she said slowly. "In biology, we call it alloparental attachment, a form of surrogate caregiving that often emerges after trauma." "You're saying Ash has adopted Rusty?" Eva asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," Marcia replied. "This isn't predatory instinct. It's not curiosity. It's a deep attachment, strong enough that if they're separated now, Ash may not survive in the wild." The room went silent. Marcia stepped toward the window, gazing out at the mist-draped pines. "This isn't sentimentality, and it's not anthropomorphism. This is reality, and our responsibility isn't to force nature into our ideal model, but to listen when it makes a choice." Eva met her eyes and knew. She had just been freed from the question she'd carried in her heart for over a week. Eva leaned forward slightly, her voice nearly lost in the whir of the ceiling fan. "And you can take them both?" "I have the space, the licenses, and the experience," Marcia answered. "Ash will have nearly an acre of forest, with climbing structures, rock dens, and natural shelters. And Rusty will live in an adjoining care area where he can come and go safely. But most importantly," she paused, looking through the glass where Ash still lay pressed against the mesh, eyes fixed on Rusty's small form in the incubator, "I can keep them together." They discussed for hours more. Paperwork, federal permits, transport logistics, veterinary support, and the accompanying education program, so that Ash and Rusty's story would not just be an exception, but a beacon of hope for future conservation work. That evening, Eva returned once more to Ash's enclosure. The air had grown misty again. The ground was damp. The compound is unusually quiet. The big bobcat still lay there, pressed against the spot where the incubator had been. Eva didn't call. She just stood long enough that her breath disappeared into the fog. Then she said softly, "We didn't plan for this, Ash. But maybe this is where you were meant to be." 2 weeks later, the transfer took place. Quiet, careful, and almost sacred. Marcia received them at the sanctuary near Donner Pass, where pine forests blanketed the hills and the breeze carried the soft scent of sap. Ash was released first. He didn't bolt, didn't hide. He simply stepped forward, calmly exploring the new territory. Tree by tree, stone by stone, trail by trail. Rusty remained in the transport crate, placed at the edge of the clearing. The pup's eyes never left the Bobcat silhouette, as if it were the only direction he knew. Marcia said gently, "We'll take it step by step, but with their history, I'm not worried." And she was right. As sunset bathed the ridgeline, Ash had already explored the full enclosure. Rusty was placed into the adjoining passage, a connecting zone where the two creatures could approach each other through a small wooden door. And then, the moment everyone hoped for, yet no one dared expect, happened. Ash stepped inside, lowered his head slightly, and sniffed the familiar scent. Rusty, without a hint of fear, approached him and rubbed his head against the Bobcat's leg. No growl, no hesitation. Ash circled once, then lay down. Rusty nestled into the space between his front legs and looked up. The large Bobcat placed a paw gently over the puppy's back and began to lick the fur on Rusty's ear. Slowly, rhythmically, with patience and tenderness. No one spoke. Only the wind moved through the pines, and a few silent tears fell onto the hands of those long practiced in holding back emotion. Marcia whispered, "Our job isn't just to heal what's visible on the skin, but to bow before the wounds no one else can see." 6 months later, a package arrived at Sierra Creek. Eva opened it. Inside was a photo album, cloth-bound with a hand-stitched leather spine, and a letter from Marcia. In the photos, Ash lay stretched out on a sun-warmed rock, eyes half closed, with Rusty tucked snugly into the curve of his front legs. Another showed them sniffing a mock prey together. In one, Rusty practiced stalking, while Ash stood behind him, watching with patient eyes. The final page held a news article. The headline read, "Unexpected Family, Bobcat Adopts Abandoned Puppy in the Sierra." The story went viral across the country, drawing hundreds of thousands of shares, and more importantly, it raised enough funding to expand the Sierra Creek Treatment Wing, making space for 20 more animals injured by forest traps. In her letter, Marcia wrote, "People keep asking me, why did Ash choose Rusty? Some say it was displaced maternal instinct, others say it was unresolved trauma. But anyone who's ever sat quietly for hours, watching those two creatures simply be near each other, all come to the same conclusion. What they witnessed was love. Not human love, but a kind of love that is undeniably real. A bond that crosses every border, even the ones we humans keep trying to build." Eva placed the album on the staff shelf, where the team liked to browse during breaks. Sierra Creek went on with its mission, rescuing, rehabilitating, and returning animals to the wild. But the story of Ash and Rusty stayed like a soft echo, reminding everyone that life doesn't follow templates, and compassion recognizes no species. Somewhere in a quiet forest near Donner Pass, a bobcat and a little dog still curl up beside each other every dusk, big and small, wild and tame, needing no explanation, only a shared warmth strong enough to remind us, sometimes love is the most powerful medicine in the world.